One tragic event that changed the face of English history took place inside of Ludlow Castle on the 2nd of April 1502. Arthur Tudor was the heir to the first Tudor King, Henry VII's throne being his eldest son. Prince Arthur had recently got married to Catherine of Aragon, but months after the marriage the pair became very ill. But the significance of Arthur's death was that his younger brother would then inherit the throne after the death of their father. This younger brother would go on to change the face of English history forever, and would be the brutal King Henry VIII. However, what is the story of the death of Arthur Tudor, the boy who should have been king? Now Arthur Tudor was the great hope for the Tudor dynasty, and Henry VII believed that his son would go on to become the man who would have many children, which would secure the Tudors' reign on the throne for centuries. But this would never happen. Arthur at birth was made the Duke of Cornwall, and he was given the greatest education across the land as he was the eldest son of the king. He was bestowed great titles, including being made a Knight of the Bath, and he was then also appointed the Prince of Wales and the Earl of Chester. He had a huge investiture celebration, and his education, as mentioned, was incredible, as it was hoped he would be king one day. There had been a myth that Arthur was a very sickly child, however there are no reports that he was ill during his life. Arthur was a tall child, and he was considered handsome by some, and he had red hair, small eyes, and a high-bridged nose. He looked similar to his brother Henry, and he was described as also being a gentle and delicate boy. But then, he was, despite being a young boy, appointed the warden of all the marshes. But when his father left for France, he was then made the keeper of England and the king's lieutenant. But despite this, he was just a child, and Henry VII established the Council of Wales and the Marshes for Prince Arthur, and it was his job to later establish the English authority in the region. He was sent to Wales first, at the age of 15 in 1501, but Henry VII planned to marry Arthur to the daughter of the Catholic Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. He wanted to build an alliance between Spain and England in the face of France. It was suggested that the choice for Arthur was the youngest daughter, Catherine of Aragon. Negotiations then took place, and it was settled that Catherine had a dowry of 200,000 crowns, which in today's money would be around £10 million. Arthur, during these negotiations, was not 14 and was below the age of consent, but with this the Pope granted a special waiver for the marriage to take place, and it was issued in the February of 1497, and Arthur and Catherine were betrothed by proxy on the 25th of August 1497. The pair wrote to each other, and Arthur stated, "I cannot tell you what an earnest desire I feel to see your Highness, and how vexatious to me it is that your procrastination about your coming. Let it be hastened, that the love conceived between us and the wished-for joys may reap their proper fruit." The pair continued to write, but Catherine landed in England on the 2nd of October 1501 in Plymouth. The following month the couple met for the first time, and Arthur wrote to his wife's parents, promising he would be a true and loving husband. But the pair could not communicate well, as they learned different versions of Latin, but on the 14th of November 1501, the marriage took place at St. Paul's Cathedral. The Archbishop of Canterbury conducted the service, and it was a huge wedding, and then, after this, the traditional bedding ceremony occurred. Lady Margaret Beaufort, Arthur's grandmother, prepared the marriage bed, and the bed was sprinkled with holy water. Catherine was prepared for bed, and Arthur was dressed in a gown and was escorted to the bedchamber. The Bishop of London prepared the bed and prayed for the marriage to be fruitful. The couple had stayed at Tickon Hill Manor for a month, and following this they then went to the Welsh marshes, and specifically Ludlow Castle, where they would establish their household. However, there was a huge problem, as Arthur had been getting weaker following his wedding. They lived at Ludlow for a number of months, but in the spring of 1502 the pair had become ill, and they were stricken by what was considered the sweating sickness. Catherine, although very ill, would recover. However, Arthur Tudor would not. He continued to get ill and continued to get worse, and on the 2nd of April 1502, whilst inside of his rooms at Ludlow Castle, Prince Arthur, the heir to the throne, died from the sweating sickness. He was only 15, and the news of his death reached the king's court 2 days later. Henry VII was completely devastated, and when he was told by his confessor that his son had died, he said, "If we received good things at the hands of God, why may we not endure evil things?" And with this he burst into tears and was grief-stricken and emotional. Henry's wife and Arthur's mother, Elizabeth of York, came into the chamber and reminded the king that they could have more children and that they had been left with yet a fair prince and 2 fair princesses, and that God is where he was, and that they were both young enough. Elizabeth did her grieving in private, and the pair were both inconsolable. It was said, when his Grace, Henry VII, understood that sorrowful, heavy tidings, he sent for the Queen, Elizabeth of York, saying that he and his Queen would take the painful sorrows together, and that she was come and saw the King her Lord, and that natural and painful sorrow, as I have heard say, she with full great and constant comfortable words besought his Grace that he would first after God remember the weal of his own noble person, that comfort of his realm and of her. She then said that my lady his mother had never no more children but him only, and that God by his grace had ever preserved him, and brought him where he was, over that how that God had left him yet a fair prince, 2 fair princesses, and that God is where he was, and we are both young. Then his Grace of true, gentle, and faithful love in good haste come and relieved her, and showed her how wise counsel she had given him before, and he for him in parting would thank God for his son, and would she should do in the like wise. When the king by his high policy had completed his alliance with Spain in this way, there suddenly came a lamentable mischance and loss to the king, queen, and all the people, for that noble Prince Arthur, the king's first begotten son, after he had been married to the Lady Catherine for 5 months, departed this transitory life at Ludlow on the 2nd of April 1502. With great funeral obsequies, and he was buried in the Cathedral Church of Worcester. After his death, the name of the prince belonged to his brother, the Duke of York, since his brother died without his issue, and so without being thus created he ought to be called, unless some apparent cause was let or obstacle to it. But the Duke, suspecting that his brother's wife was with child, and was thought possibly by the expert and wise men of the prince's council, was by a month or more delayed from his title, name, and preeminence, in which time the truth might easily appear to women. It is reported that this Lady Catherine thought and feared such an unhappy chance might come, for when she had embraced her father, and taken leave of her noble and prudent mother, and sailed towards England, she was continually so tossed and tumbled hither and thither, with boisterous winds, that what with the raging of the water and the contrary winds her ship was prevented many times from approaching the shore and landing. The funeral procession was large, and Catherine of Aragon did not attend the funeral, and a special waggon, whilst was covered in black cloth, took the coffin of Arthur Tudor to Worcester Cathedral, where it was interred inside of a large stone tomb. But following Arthur's death, the question now came to who would marry his widow, Catherine of Aragon. Henry VII did not want to pay back the dowry payment, and with this he even considered marrying her himself, following the death of his wife, Elizabeth of York. However then, Henry VIII, the now eldest son of Henry VII, was betrothed to Catherine, and the pair would then marry. But it's Arthur's legacy which had the biggest impact in history. His life was largely uneventful, despite the fact he was the heir to the Tudor throne. But in his death, his brother Henry would become the heir to the throne, and he would later become the notorious King Henry VIII. He would be the man who split England during the Reformation due to his desire to marry Anne Boleyn, and he was known for having 6 wives, 2 of whom lost their heads inside of the Tower of London. Henry VIII's life and reign as king was a bloody one, with over 70,000 people executed in his kingdom. But without the death of his brother Prince Arthur, he would have never become king. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.